Hello and welcome to Cloud Speed by Deloitte. In this regular podcast series, we'll delve into the world of cloud, answering some of those tricky questions, getting to grips with all that cloud has to offer, and keeping you up to speed on recent developments. So let's begin, shall we? Here is your host, Adam Gogarty.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thank you for joining me on this episode of Cloud Speed by Deloitte. I'm Adam Gogarty, a director in our cloud engineering practice, and I'll be your host for this episode. Last time we had a fantastic conversation about women in cloud, but today we're going to be shifting gears a little bit and exploring the topic of cloud migration. There's been a lot of talk around migration, particularly from the cloud service providers, but the big questions are, when is the right time to move to the cloud? And fundamentally, how can you set yourself up for a successful migration? To help me unpack today's topic, I'm excited to be joined by my colleagues Darren Dunford and Hine Ladd. But before we get into the detail, it would be great to find out a little bit more about what you do. So Darren, why don't you introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Thanks, Adam, and thank you for having me. I'm Darren. I'm a director in Deloitte. I've been in the IT industry for a little over 20 years now. Spent over half of that in automotive, but not exclusively so. Most of my work nowadays is on cloud native development. I'm very passionate about it. We cover all the three major cloud providers. Outside of work, I am a father. I have a son and a daughter, avid fan of Lego, and we make some fantastic creations. And so that's perhaps why I like playing with the building blocks of the cloud just as much as the building blocks of their toys. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Cheers, Darren. Thank you. My name is Hine Ladd. I lead the cloud migration market offering for our cloud partners in the UK. Now, I've spent a load of time, in fact, the vast majority of my 20 years, helping clients to migrate. Now, this used to be all about migrating from data center to data center. These days, it's almost exclusively about helping clients migrate to cloud. What I'm not worrying about migration, I guess the kind of main thing that occupies my time is a really geeky fascination with home automation. I spend a huge amount of time, embarrassingly a large amount of time, trying to get various bits and pieces of my house to automate themselves. And I moved into a new house recently as well, so that'll be fun. And then also cycling. So when the weather kind of picks up, I'll get back out on my road bike to appreciate the hills of Yorkshire, which is where I live.
Perfect. Thanks, both. Look, I think your particular expertise here is going to make for a really interesting episode. So, Darren, why don't you kick us off and talk us through, I guess, what you're seeing in terms of what's driving organisations to pursue a migration to cloud?
Yeah, so for organisations, cloud has presented huge opportunity, and as you say, we're now beginning to see our organisations seize those. Often, what comes to mind is cost. Especially as cloud enables organizations to shift to a purely operating expense model for cost. So gone are the capital investments of big data centers and all the fixed running costs. You can just pay as you use it. But often that is a little bit elusive. It isn't just about cost, and the bigger cost savings don't come about just from lifting and shifting workloads. And we can come into that a little bit later on. We're also seeing, and this is particularly true given the pandemic over the last year, scaling driving the need for cloud migration, because by the very nature of pay as you use, you can use a lot quickly if you have the need to and if you have the ability to, something which when you're constrained by the physical four walls of a data center, you may not be able to see. We're also seeing companies wish to access some of the much more innovative technologies that cloud has to offer. If you think about, for instance, machine learning and artificial intelligence and big data analytics, these are technologies that you would think require a lot of investment, both for the compute required to do it and for the research into how to do it and for the expertise. And cloud providers give that to organizations on tap, on a just pay for it as you use it basis. Some of this quite deep compute technology that organizations can get into. Lastly, they can also access this. They can innovate using these technologies much more quickly. So the ability to ramp up and try something and experiment is much more real with the cloud. And as companies see their competitors do that, so they want to do that themselves. And all of those reasons we're seeing as part of drivers to cloud migration.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of start by kind of looking backwards, I guess. So in the old days, like migration was really about some, monstrous, compelling event that was driving, kind of a migration out of a data center. So things like a merger or acquisition, or the end of a large outsource agreement, or, you just hit the buffers and you've got no more room to expand in your existing data centers, or your data centers hit, kind of its end of life. It just has components that need to be upgraded, and so you have to kind of get your workloads out. Or there might be a real estate, kind of redevelopment or sale kind of activity that's driving a kind of migration. I think back on some of my previous projects where, kind of a real estate redevelopment had a very fixed timeline. So when there's a wrecking ball that's kind of coming towards you, it very much focuses the mind on how you get out as quickly and as neatly as you can. But that was the old world. I mean, the new world, just as Darren was describing, is really a kind of world of possibility, and cloud is that business enabler that's core to kind of the future of many organizations, and it's forcing a much closer examination, I guess, of how technology is treated in the business. So in terms of kind of why are organizations pursuing a move to cloud, we've got all of the old reasons, but we've got all of those new reasons as well, including kind of the bits that Darren mentioned around AI, machine learning, IoT platforms, contact centers in the cloud, enabling digital transformation. And then there's kind of the slightly more nuanced reasons around simplifying operations. So, this desire to have easily accessible automation or PaaS services to kind of reduce the maintenance focus and the distraction that the operational teams have.
Thanks, both. And I guess, Hine, apart from hopefully the lack of a wrecking ball, how does cloud migration differ to the traditional data center migration?
Yeah, so I guess the cloud itself and what it offers and how it works makes it kind of different when clients look at a cloud migration versus a traditional migration. So the kind of possibilities that are open to the kind of business teams when you make that leap to cloud with some of your legacy workloads. Now, some of that is about replatforming. So pretty straightforward. How do I make better use of this new, wonderful set of infrastructure services that are available to me in the new world? Or it's to go, kind of much further and actually look at fully reimagining the kind of application stack, and that's very much, kind of the world in which kind of Darren helps our clients. So once you cut through the hype, it genuinely does require a change in thinking and mindset to be able to make the most of this new cloud tool. So if we take the example of a fixed service suddenly becoming flexible or elastic, that has implications across many parts of an organization. So it changes the way that you design. It changes the way in which you kind of operate and run that workload once it goes live. It changes the way in which you forecast the finances for that server now that it's in cloud. It changes the way in which you develop your software. I mean, it can impact your organizational risk appetite. You might want to and feel that you can take more risks without that high bar to entry. But all of this comes with additional considerations. So security, how do you secure and protect, recover, restore those workloads that you're putting into cloud? How do you operate them safely? How do you work in this new world where if you have scalable platforms, things will pop up or disappear based on the demand that's put upon those systems? And this is where kind of, I guess, Adam's world kind of really drives in. It's about how we help customers and clients weave that, kind of nuanced set of drivers into a case that actually people can really connect with across the business. It can be quite tricky. So in the old world, there'd be a compelling event that kind of drove whereas in the new world, there's a far more nuanced kind of set of drivers, but it has a much broader impact across the organization. What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, so I'll pick up on a couple of the points you made around, take, for instance, scaling and cost. With cloud, people often think of scaling and cost as yes, you can scale up to meet an increasing demand and only pay for when you need it, but you also need to look at it the other way, and that's where a lot of the real true savings come from. Can you scale back in almost to the point of not using any compute power, anything, when there is no demand? Can you do that, scale in and scale out at the point where the demand is needed? Now, cloud gives you the ability to do that if your applications are architected with that in mind, if your workloads are architected with that in mind. And that's where it's often different to a traditional data center migration. You're thinking about how can we truly get that scaling benefit from the cloud. I'll also pick up on one other point around the use of some of the innovative technologies. Take, for instance, something that we may have all seen recently about how banks can take pictures. You could take a picture of a check to pay it into a bank. Now, the banks obviously have got the ability to invest in that kind of tech, but smaller companies don't have. Here is another opportunity for you to re-architect applications that could take advantage of that kind of image recognition technology. But again, you've got to think about how can you do this. So don't approach migration as I must move all of my applications into the cloud just exactly as they are. Take the opportunity, as you said, Hene, to think about which ones do I need to migrate, which ones can I retire, or which ones could I wholly rebuild to take advantage of it.
Thanks, Darren. And I guess, based on your experience, what do you think the kind of critical success factors are then for successful cloud migration?
So Hene mentioned at the beginning that cloud migration is not usually driven by a compelling event or a hard deadline. It's not, the building's going to close or the lease is going to expire. So don't think about it as something you've got to do in one big bang or in a short period. When you approach a cloud migration, think about some of the foundational elements. Yes, you need to have those in place. Even though it's in the cloud, there is still a location element to consider, because most cloud providers allow you to specify which major cities you want to locate in, and you may want to make that more than one, so you get some resilience. And you've got to think about, for instance, data residency requirements, and all regulatory requirements about where you can be located. Another foundational element is the underlying logical network you want to build. So rather than just go straight into it, you've got to think about some of the basics. It may not be physical network that you're now building, but the same principles apply in generating a logical network. Think about how the cloud is going to coexist with the on-prem estate, because you're probably not going to move over a weekend. You're going to have a period of many months or a year or so where you're operating with both, or you may keep an element of your on-premise estate for a longer period of time. Maybe there's a part of your data you do want to keep close to you. So think about that integration. And as Hene also said, think about security. So you get those foundational elements in place. Security is one of those, obviously a major one. But once you've got that, you can then do your workloads one by one. You can then think about, well, there are some that I can move quite quickly because there are, some cost benefits to it, or gets over the aging technology that you mentioned earlier, or servers that are very difficult, the physical servers to support. But whilst that is going on, then you've also got time in, a longer period of time in phases to think about those workloads that you want to reinvent. So don't think of it just as a big bang. In planning this, think about how do you get the expertise to leverage this properly? It is unlikely that the mainstay of the skill set that you had over the last, say, decade ago is going to give you the best outcomes when you migrate to the cloud. So yes, there's retraining, yes, there's rehiring, and there's also looking at to bring in some specialists to help to plan that migration, to think about those foundational points that I mentioned, and to invest in some of the changes in your IT engineering organization that you're going to need to do so that they can leverage the cloud and support your workloads in the cloud going forward. Also think about, what is your target operating model? So some of the organizations that have adopted the cloud maybe 5 years ago, the cloud was actually kind of like a Wild West. Classically, if you sign up for a cloud account, you get an account that could do anything, right? It's allowable. And that's not going to play well with some of the regulated industries and the requirements that businesses now have. So great for innovation, great for our talented engineers to go and play with, but a lack of control around what was built. So think about an operating model that actually allows for both. How do you build your virtual data center in the cloud? So you've got environments to allow experiment and innovation, environments which are secured and controlled and governed for production workloads, and just like you would I'm sure you do in your on-prem data centers you have at the moment, and a well-defined path between the two.
Yeah, lots of really great examples there. Thank you, Darren. I mean, I'd add kind of three more to that if I can. I think there's a little bit of overlap, but I mean, the first one is really around having a really clear and concise migration strategy. So again, we talked about the potential of cloud. If you're opening that up to your organization, there are lots of different directions almost that you can kind of move in and you can kind of go in. So it's really important that, kind of as you bound your migration strategy, what things you cover most, and how do you structure and build your migration around delivering those things, kind of in the right time frame. The second, I would say, is around making effective use of automation and standardization that's out there. So if you're considering a migration, in an ideal world, you want to do it quickly, and ideally, you want to avoid reinventing the wheel if you don't have to. I mean, the reality is that from the industry solved for the most common technical problems. As an example, Deloitte acquired Atadata, and we've now got a team of offshore SMEs who are absolute experts in using that. So we've got scalable, low-cost migration execution in that factory that's industrialized the kind of commodity server migration activities. Now, this is important because there are some services that are going to be commoditizable in their migration. There are some that are not. So it's important that as part of a migration, you give yourself the space and the capacity to be able to focus on those more complex migration projects and not get bogged down in things that are far more straightforward to move. I guess the final point I'd make, the most impactful thing that can, I guess, adjust the velocity of a migration is really not technology in my experience, it's people. So engaging with those business teams to kind of understand how the migration actually enables their organization is super important, or at the very least, kind of being clear about how we minimize the disruption upon them is important to kind of build that collaboration so that we can migrate as quickly and as safely as we can.
There's a lot to think about, isn't there, really? It makes me think of one of my favourite phrases, people, process and technology, but specifically in that order. Hine, therefore, what are those kind of big challenges or hurdles that you've perhaps seen in the kind of the people, the process, or otherwise?
Yeah, so I think if I stick to threes, let me give you three examples of things that I find kind of often. I mean, the first and the most obvious one is bad or incomplete data. Ultimately, bad data drives wastage, incomplete data drives poor decisions. And what I mean by that is, kind of for the last two discoveries I did in the last few months at clients, we found about 20% of the infrastructure that we scanned is actually switch offable. It just isn't serving a purpose within the client's organization. And these things obviously chomp through thousands a year to kind of maintain and keep on. They change the risk exposure of the organization by increase that attackable surface area. So there's all sorts of good reasons to kind of find and switch those things off. But more worryingly, I guess, when we're looking at migration, not having a complete data set doesn't allow you to make data-based decisions around, kind of what you have to migrate and how you will migrate. I guess the second area is kind of linked to that, which is then, the common thing that I find when talking to clients when they're challenging themselves with how their migration will look is just being overly optimistic about how much and what they can move to cloud. Now, from a technical perspective, bar contractual agreements or protective markings or regulations, I've come across very few examples that I can't, in inverted commas, technically move to cloud. It's just that it'd be excruciatingly expensive, so you just wouldn't do it. And so what could move is not always the same as what will move as part of a migration. So grounding, kind of your expectations for the migration against that is really important. The final one, in terms of challenges, is sluggish execution. We've come into a number of clients where we've helped them, kind of, I guess, jumpstart their migration project or address some particular issue that's kind of slowing them down in their desire to adopt cloud services. if you kind of look at the migration as a business change as well as an infrastructure change, you've got more chance of being able to win the hearts and minds of those individuals that are kind of protecting various processes within the business. And so with that collaboration, you'll be able to kind of address, I guess, the kind of root cause that slows down the typical ability to migrate. Those are the kind of top three challenges that I see. I guess over to you, Darren.
Yeah, so I would add to that by saying in considering a migration, organizations also need to look at the cultural shift at boardroom level about IT in an organization. And this, I guess, is something that many CIOs have struggled, of challenges they've been dealing with anyway, trying to get IT to be seen less as a cost center or something that the organization just has to deal with, and something more providing innovation. Move away from seeing IT as a predictable cost overhead and cloud costs as something which, this is just the fixed cost that we're going to pay. As I've mentioned a number of times, cloud allows you to be a pay-as-you-use utility model, allows you, and that's where a lot of the benefits come from, certainly on the financial side. I once dealt with an organization with a procurement team who were insisting that we provided a fixed quote for the cloud costs in the product. We need this in our bid. And I try to explain to them that cloud costs are now going to be much more like the electricity bill. You can look at trends and you can make estimates about it, but it isn't a fixed cost. It's not like the rent on a data center. And so that cultural mindset needs to go through some of the functions that not just IT, but that support the rest of the organization, be that finance or HR for skills and procurement, as I've mentioned. The other thing I would add on is considering cyber risk. And that's ever present in today's world. As every week we read about another data breach or a hack in the news. And with cloud, there is no longer a physical perimeter that you can point at where you can say, my data lives in here. And there's no defined, it's harder to define ingress and egress points for the data and put the controls around it. And the cloud providers will rightly point out to you that security is a shared responsibility. So the cloud providers will say, we will do this bit, and the client needs to do this bit, and therefore clients need to step up and do their half of the bargain to get security right. And that goes to the point I made earlier around having a well-defined security architecture, policies and processes in place, and some considerable thinking as that foundational element in any migration.
And I guess, Darren, to access some of that kind of innovation, to address some of the improvements in cyber security posture, I often hear a lot about the level of transformation or the transformation appetite as part of a cloud migration. So I guess what kind of level of business application and/or I guess infrastructure transformation are organizations undertaking in these cloud migrations? Well,
thinking about it from the application point of view, almost all the conversations that I have with clients now around application build are for applications in the cloud. I can think of very few cases now where you wouldn't want to build or make a significant change to an application without moving it to the cloud. If it's one of your line of business applications, one of your strategic applications will provide differentiation. You might, for instance, want to consider staying on-prem if you've got serious data residency or in national security or something like that, or maybe some medical applications, but even that is changing. So in the application space, there is strong appetite for this, and it's more a case of helping organizations unlock the ability to migrate their existing portfolio, which they might perceive to be hard to do. It's almost as if they want to do it. And I've had some really enjoyable conversations with clients about enabling them how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could probably broadly break the kind of types of change into two big buckets. The first bucket for me really is around those types of changes that are driven out of some necessity. They're almost kind of hygiene points. So, kind of clients using the migration as an opportunity to fix like lots of data operating systems. where an upgrade is required. We've seen kind of clients using migration to standardize the variants that they might have of operating systems. This kind of principle that 5 variants of an operating system are going to be far easier to maintain than 25, and so it kind of just lowers the overall kind of overhead. Also using migration to kind of fix patching where that's kind of fallen behind in the patching regime. So there's a bunch of kind of operational hygiene things that are kind of fixed out of necessity. I guess the second big bucket for me when chatting to clients is around stuff that's a little bit more interesting, and it kind of looks at how we kind of exploit the benefits that cloud can bring. So as an example, containerization, that almost always comes up in client conversations as something that's kind of on the roadmap. And so you end up having really interesting conversations with clients around, helping them translate that ambition into a tangible roadmap. And we recently kind of helped a client launch a kind of containerization trial where they're able to kind of take some of these lovely ideas and actually fire a number of their application workloads at it to see how straightforward or complex it is to take a number of web-based applications and containerize them. PaaS adoption, specifically in the database space, is typically pretty high on the agenda, and there are lots of obvious reasons for that. And the tooling and the kind of workflows are pretty mature now in terms of how you go from old to new. What the kind of limitations and opportunities are. That's kind of often one that's on that list. And increasingly, again, wholesale replacement of infrastructure services. So and this is really kind of mashing the old legacy world with the new. So how does IAM look in this kind of hybrid IT environment? How do you move away from your old ways of doing backup and monitoring into kind of a cloud native way of doing them? And a number of the workflows that kind of we've developed for clients are specifically designed around making those changes as we migrate applications and servers from the old world to the cloud.
Really interesting. I guess lots of opportunities to transform ultimately. And Darren and Hina, I know that you both work across a number of industry sectors. So I guess in those industries, do you think now is the kind of right time to move to cloud? And I guess, are you seeing any specific trends or opportunities that are industry specific? Darren?
I think we're now at a tipping point where pursuing a cloud migration is no longer the realm of, say, early adopters or the tech savvy clients. Is now something that most organizations are thinking about as a modernized activity they have to do, or in some form planning it already. So much so that there'll come a point maybe in the next few years where those skills required to run a physical data center, the IT operation skills, will become much harder to find. So there'll come a point where cloud migration is something that organizations have to do rather than want to do. And we're not that far away from that, in my view. So is it the right time to move to the cloud? Yes, I would say it is. To look at a specific example in consumer retail, and thinking about digital customer engagement and e-commerce, those are areas where cloud migration enables fast time to market, experimentation, and innovation. And almost a year ago, we saw that massively fueled by necessity from the pandemic. Suddenly, clients that in the early stages of thinking about e-commerce, or maybe they had done some pilots with it, or they had an on-prem solution that had been running for 5-10 years that was serving some customers, saw a massive increase in demand of people wanting to engage with their business online across all age groups and all demographics. People that you wouldn't necessarily think would engage online are now having to. And those companies which had some form of cloud solution in the first place found it much easier to scale to meet that, and those that didn't hence came looking for that ability. And I also think we're seeing it in government. So Deloitte does a lot of work with the public sector, as I'm sure you can see in the press. So yes, we're now seeing much more use of the cloud in government for the same kind of digital citizen engagement, if you like. And that's not necessarily just fueled by the pandemic. That's been going on for the 5+ years. Think, for instance, about how all of our stuff with driving licenses is done. Again, that's cloud technology driving digital engagement. But we've seen more of it recently with the pandemic as well. Hine?
Yeah, I'll build on that public sector kind of point. I mean, I've had a couple of really interesting conversations where I guess some of this data that has to be treated quite carefully, protectively marked data. There's this kind of recognition that cloud has a role to play, where we're able to very carefully kind of differentiate between data that needs to have, all of the protection kind of put in place to keep it safe, and actually where cloud can help drive down drastically the kind of cost of hosting. So there's really a sea change in the way that people are looking at cloud, from that perspective, which I think will be really interesting over the coming years. I guess two other kind of points from me. The first would be, kind of life sciences, prolific uses of data centers and data in particular. I mean, they're reaching now a kind of point where the services that they are able to exploit when they move to cloud are enough of a pull to do something about those legacy application workloads and that legacy data that they have. And so now is a point at which, there were a lot more conversations around actually how do we get to a place where we can kind of exploit those lovely cloud services that are offered in analytics. I guess one kind of observation with a number of kind of negotiations, I guess we've helped clients with, is around some of the behaviours that we're seeing from colo providers. So as colo, I guess, arrangements are reaching their conclusion, clients are increasingly, kind of looking at cloud first as their kind of next step. And what we're actually seeing is a fundamental change, I guess, in some of the behaviours of colo providers, where they've recognised the threat, and they're taking steps now to actually, kind of open negotiation on gouging their own rates to be able to keep the business. So there's a really interesting kind of tension now that's building between kind of cloud and colo, and I guess all of this is to the benefit of the clients if you're, if you're armed with that information to be able to have those kind of conversations. It's just a really interesting time right now.
Brilliant. No, completely agree. Really interesting topic. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I guess if I were to try and take a few takeaways from this, in most cases it's different to a data center migration, right? That the drivers are just fundamentally different. You've got this huge opportunity to actually transform not just technology but the business. But you need to get a few things right. In my mind, I'm always thinking it's not about migrating kind of technology and applications. It's actually about migrating the organization, the team around those to take advantage of all of the functionality and the value that cloud can deliver. But unfortunately, once again, we find ourselves at the end of the episode. So I'd like to offer a big thanks once again to our guests, Hine.
Thank you very much, Adam. I'd love every opportunity to wax lyrical on cloud. It's a topic that's very close to my heart. So thank you very much.
And Darren?
Thank you, Adam. Been a very enjoyable conversation.
Fantastic. And I hope you found this episode as informative as always, as I have, listeners. Do share the Cloud Speed series with your colleagues and friends on social media, and subscribe on your podcast platform to be notified when we release a new episode. Please do reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn at Adam Gogarty. Or if you'd like to find out more on Deloitte's cloud capabilities, please visit deloitte.co.uk/cloud. But until next time, I'm Adam Gogarty, and you've been listening to Cloud Speed by Deloitte.